What's up, everybody? We are back with another podcast. I guess this is the first official podcast of 2025. I know you're overjoyed. You're like, where have we been? Did we lose you? 3 people already tuned in. They were waiting on this. Thank you guys already jumping in. Jai Opetaia beats David Nyika. I think I said his name right. Not going to lie to you. I watched this fight on mute, so I have no actual idea how to say people's names. But to me, the big takeaway is a few things, right? And then I'll let you share your wisdom and thoughts. But one big thing about Jai Opetaia is hand speed and power. That's real as real as real. There's nothing fake about that. He's obviously one of the 2 best cruiserweights in the world. It's him and Zordo. I think because Zordo's lost, people are going to underrate Zordo because that's what people do. Oh, the guy lost once. He can't be the best guy, etc. And there is a relentlessness and a nastiness to Jai Opetaia in this finish that I think it's going to be hard for anyone to have a better knockout in 2025 January, because this was a highlight reel knockout to start the year off. Where do we start our discussion, Dakota?
I think the place to start it is that there's the obvious, I think, vulnerabilities of some of the hittable moments, of some of the times where it seems like he gets a little chinned, and part of why he gets a little chinned is because he's there to get chinned. And I think that in spite of that, his offensive output, how hard he hits, how athletic he is, the speed he's got for a cruiserweight, especially for a cruiserweight, there's just, he's not, we were talking about this the other day, he's not a good hang, bro. Like, he's not a fun night. And unless somebody's really special and they're able to take advantage of one of those moments, which some guys have, and they still haven't been able to beat him, I just think he's a handful. Sometimes he reminds me a little of Benavidez. Sometimes he reminds me a little of Christian and Billy, because he's kind of a free swinger. All in all, though, for me, he's the number 2 guy, just because I feel like Zordo has fought at a higher level, even if it's at lower weights. At the end of the day, Bivol is a guy of his generation. I don't know that Jai has kind of stepped up to that level yet, but at the moment, that's a exciting, attractive fight, that will highlight a division that doesn't always get the attention it should.
Well, I think the other thing, he reminded me a little bit of David Tua, because, and there's a shout out to the Attitude Boys. Hello, where are you from? It doesn't matter where we're from. We're the boxing guys. So, it doesn't matter. We're parts boxing. And Jeremiah Moses says, hi, how you doing, Jeremiah? Tons of people in the chat now. The stream is blowing up. It's beautiful to see. We love that. We're the numbers boys today. They wanted 2025. They wanted a good podcast. We're giving it to them. There's a level of Tua to him where in the first 4 to 5 rounds, he can catch you with something big. He can hurt you. And then it's to be answered how he does in that second half of the fight. His career, I think, is going to be defined at the highest level. I was looking at the pound for pound. To me, I think Shakur and Gervonta have the talent to be in the pound for pound, but there's a part of me that thinks Benavidez and Jai Opetaia or even Zordo are more deserving of that. Just, I think Opetaia, to me, because he fought 5 times in like 2 years, I mean, the activity kind of should be rewarded. He's like a fringe pound for pound guy to me right now. Where do you see him? Am I overrating him?
He's a fringe pound for pound guy. I don't know if he's on that list for me yet, but he's kind of like an on deck guy. And I think part of the reason for that is because Myris Bradis was a hell of a fighter, bro. He was an older guy in his late 30s, but that guy was a hell of a fighter. Gave Usyk probably his best fight, or one of his best fights to date. And I think because he was an older guy and he was a little less active, that people kind of discount those wins. But those are world-class wins.
Well, in Dakota, I think the other thing too is he fights at cruiserweight, which is a division that's not typically a fun hang. It's typically guys who are maybe light heavyweights but can't compete at the highest level light heavyweight, and they're maybe a little undersized to be a heavyweight. So it's typically you're not finding, and maybe now we're finding a new era, but before the Usyks, we had a big gap, right? We had a big gap between Holyfield and Usyk. we had guys like Steve Cunningham, but there were guys in these divisions where it was like they're talented fighters, but we don't really see them excelling in another division besides this division. And they're kind
The
of
best
flawed.
example of that I could think of is Adamek, because he was a really good fighter at other weight classes as well.
Well, Marco Hook is a guy that comes to mind for me, where it's like
Yep.
he's a flawed fighter, but he excels in this division, and he's going to make some fun fights. But maybe for you and me, we might tune it in, we might tune it on and watch, but we're not going out of our way to watch it because it doesn't feel as historically significant. So if you want to see a good fight, maybe you watch a cruiserweight fight, but the significance of the division didn't seem as meaningful because it never felt like these are the guys that would really enshrine themselves into a deep legacy. Like it felt like everyone was kind of 82, 83. That was
Right.
their overalls. And the division was exciting for some hardcore fans because there was no separation. So on any given night,
Usyk's era was exciting. I felt like Usyk's era was exciting. They had that tournament that was majority televised, where we were able to get a certain level of attachment. There was, Gassiev, the Polish guy, Ladarczyk, I think is his name. There was a lot of really good fighters in the Usyk era of cruiserweight, that I think having that tournament style thing, it got me more engaged, in that division.
And that was right after the Marco Hook era, right? So you come from the Hook era, and then you had Usyk and Mariat Gassiev, and those two really brought new life to that division. And I think that the guys before that, like I think of a guy like BJ Flores, who is an outstanding fighter. He just never got the opportunities. So there's always been guys that were really good, in my opinion, in that division. But it was, you think about Michael Hunter. Michael Hunter couldn't really get a good fight in cruiserweight. So there's always been guys, but for whatever reason. So I think that I'm not trying to poo-poo on cruiserweight, but I think it's a division that people have consistently not been interested in and not had a deep knowledge of.
Yeah.
So it's hard to rank a fighter from cruiserweight in the pound for pound, because I think that for most fans, it lacks the meaning of other divisions.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. Zordo isn't pound for pound. He got destroyed by Bivol. I mean, there's some truth to that, right? Like there's a lot he's going to have to do to kind of redeem himself in terms of being that kind of a fighter. But I feel like beating Billum Smith in the way that he did, and some of the success he's had at cruiserweight and down at super middleweight, at least for me, Zordo's not on the list, but he's another one like Jai Opetaia, where he's kind of on deck. And I think that the winner of that fight is probably, starting to become in the mix for the pound for pound conversation.
Well, and I spilled coffee all over my keyboard, which is lovely.
Wow.
Yeah, it's such a great start to the show. But thankfully it's watery. To me also, I think that so Bivol's obviously like a top 5 pound for pound guy. If you got him, like maybe if you discount his loss to Better Beef, the highest you put him is 7. Losing to a guy that's obviously one of the best fighters, to me, is not like, you can still be the 10th best guy in the sport and lose to one of the obviously best 5 guys. I think to me, it's about Zordo's reinvention of himself at this weight class that could make him that. But we're entering a point where, and I think that this speaks to another issue, lightweight with Gervonta Davis and Shakur Stevenson, they're not fighting each other. And that's a fight that needs to happen. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about that fight, but that's a fight that for historical significance needs to happen. And if Zordo and Jai Opetaia make a fight, that's a historically significant fight that I think will, and the same with Benavidez, where I think Benavidez on the pound for pound, he's making a historical significant fight with Morrell. And if he wins that fight, you have to favor guys that are taking historically significant fights, in my opinion, over the eye test. And it's just, if we start going all eye test and going over historically significant fights, we get into some weird things where it's going to be your favorite fighters.
That's a great point, bro. And I think that, especially if, like I was saying, if Opetaia and Zordo have a matchup, that the winner of that fight, for me at least, starts to be in the top 15 conversation.
Yeah, our guy TJ Mill City Boxing, he said, "Sup, fellas? Really seems like Benavidez and Morel is not getting little attention." What are your thoughts, Dakota? Real quick.
I'm sort of unaware of how much attention it is or isn't getting. I'm excited for it because I'm a boxing head and I'm a boxing insider, and that's a fantastic matchup. Um, but at the end of the day, I feel like PBC as a promotion right now is a little bit lackluster for me.
Our guy Vinayak Singh says it's crazy to say that Fury won both fights versus Usyk because rewatching both, I had Fury winning 114, 113, and 115, 130. I mean, they're both close fights, and if you watch a fight and that's what you see, I mean, there's no harm in saying that you saw Fury winning two close fights. He probably has a style that the way you watch and score fights suits your eye better than what Usyk does. Um, I'm not mad at that take because I think though I thought Usyk won both fights and I thought they were kind of clear, there are also fights where I don't think either guy fully separated in either fight. Maybe Usyk did in the second fight a little more, but I don't think that's like really a hot take. I think that those fights are two of the best fighters where neither guy was able to take over because they were literally two of the best heavyweights of their era.
I think I agree with most of what you said. The part I don't agree with is I did not think that the second one was particularly close, and I felt like the way, Usyk got the knockdown in the first one and pulled away down the stretch, I felt like they were great competitive fights, but that they weren't that close, at least for me.
So for me, I felt like both fights were fairly close, and I was uncertain of the scores when they were being read. So that's why, like, I did not know what the outcomes would be for either fight when they went to the judges. So that's what I'm saying. Like,
Sure.
I was not ready to wrap Christmas presents and stuff and just be ready for the outcome. Warlock Boxing gave us a boxing glove. We appreciate it. Any more thoughts on Jai Opetaia-David Nyika? I guess one last thought I'd like to say is Jai Opetaia probably enters the conversation for Boxer of the Year because he won in January. If he returns in April, we're looking at a guy, if he beats Zordo, he could easily fight 3 to 4 times. He's an active fighter. I mean, I think that for me, what's interesting is he puts his name on the list to be one of the most relevant and active fighters and campaign for that honor this year.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I'm ready to jump that quickly, but I think he's super exciting. Outside of Zordo, too, to be honest, I would love to see him fight Billum Smith. It would be very interesting to me just to see how he kind of holds up to somebody with that relentless sort of style, and if he's able to be consistent enough to beat somebody like that.
Okay, undercard. What did you think of Justis Huni?
Unfortunately, Lukie, I didn't get to see this undercard, so I got to lean on you for this one.
That is great because I will talk about Justis Huni on the undercard. Had basically a hand-selected opponent. It looked like he had every physical trait. I believe it was a second-round stoppage. There was not much we could take from it. It felt like with what Eddie Hearn was saying that they're looking to step him up in competition fairly soon. Because of that, I don't know. Like, to me, Justis Huni is not going to be like a Floyd Mayweather, run the gamut and be undefeated. He's a fun, exciting guy. I think, like, I look at a fight between him and Fabio Wardley one day, and I think that's a great matchup.
Yep.
I think you can make good fights with him, exciting fights. Maybe depending on the era of the division, he could win a belt, but I don't think he's ever going to be like a top guy. But I think that he's going to be a fun action fighter who can make some good fights. And you kind of hit it on the head with him. We've had a lot of like lumbering giants, and he's an athletic, fast hand guy. And we haven't had one of those guys in a while, or we're seeing a new era of guys. And it's kind of fun just seeing a workhorse volume guy kind of establish himself in the division. Let me read through some of the other results before we break down the rest of what's going on. Max McIntyre got a 4th round knockout. Opponent was 8-1, but really didn't look on his level. He won the IBF super middleweight title youth, which means he'll probably get a world ranking. So that's someone to kind of keep your eye on. Ben Mahoney was someone that they brought up in my newsletter. he really looked average in his fight. He won a form of an IBF title in junior middleweight. He's been kind of talked about with Nikita Zhu, and I think that's a pretty evenly matched fight. I think Nikita's probably a level above him. If you're looking at kind of someone outside of the big names, Justis Huni and Jai Opetaia that could break out, look at Shauna Browne. She has a huge social media following. I know there's a lot of purists that get mad at when you say that, but I think she has like 153K followers. She went to Australia and beat an Australian fighter by split decision in a 10-round fight at junior welterweight. So, I mean, in 4 fights, she won a really big fight. That was her 5th fight. So I think that's someone. Our guy Tony Tolj had a guy named Zhu who beat undefeated Tony Ingram. That was kind of a shocker. Tony Ingram, featherweight, 6-0, lost to Zhu, who was 8-2-1 heading into the fight. It was pretty decisive. And then, of course, my guy Teremoana Jr. Teremoana Jr. to me, just a phenomenal big puncher, first round knockout. I mean, he's going to be in the mix for one of the best prospects of the year because we're looking at a guy who's going to get a lot of first round knockouts, big personality. Probably by the summers in 8 and 10 round fights because he's just going to be getting these things. So that's kind of like my news and notes from this undercard.
I mean, I really like Justis Huni, and I think for me, like you said, starting to see kind of more athletic hand speed type heavyweights. I just think there's going to be a lot of heavyweights that struggle with that style because they're not used to seeing a guy their size, they can move like that. Now, Justis is like a little bit shorter for a modern heavyweight, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think he can't be over 6'2" or 6'3", but you look at somebody like Agit Kabayel and how he's able to use his hand speed and his footwork to get his way to the inside and throw combinations that some heavyweights are just not going to be used to or prepared to defend. So Huni's got his issues and his vulnerability.
So he's listed at 6'4".
Okay, that's about average height for a heavyweight. Then I would say maybe he fought somebody who was shorter than, so it looked exaggerated. But yeah, I think his style is a problem for a lot of guys, bro.
Well, I want to push on this. I think a lot of guys, big guys, don't like fighting at a fast pace. And I think that's his biggest asset is he fights at a pace that a lot of bigger men want to fight at a slower trotting pace. And I think he can sneak up on some guys, kind of how I never saw it with Fabio Wardley coming up, but Fabio Wardley, besides being able to punch, has an output and a pace that these other fighters don't enjoy fighting at. And I think that if I were to make a comparison, he's not exactly the same. 2 things I like about him, volume and pace, but also that he gets off the line and he rips. So he's like slipping punches and throwing back. And it's like, he presents some
body work too. When you're throwing a lot of body shots as a heavyweight, I think that automatically gives you advantage, because in the Klitschko era, those guys were so arm's length that there wasn't as much body work. You know what I mean?
Well, and it's like how I always said, and this, I wish we were doing a show back then, but when Andy Ruiz fought Joshua the first time and he beat him, I said the fight would be hard because Joshua has trouble with guys who slip punches. So he's so big, he's not used to guys slipping, dipping, and ripping. He's used to be like when a guy blocks a shot, he's not. And Ruiz is a big enough guy where he'll plant his feet, he'll let you throw a punch, and if you miss, he's coming back with something extremely hard. And I don't think Huni has the raw potential of Ruiz because Ruiz had a Hall of Fame type ability, but he has a little bit of that. I can sit, I can make you miss, and I can throw back. And there's really outstanding heavyweights that I truly think haven't experienced that at a high level. And that there's guys that lose because of that one thing, because it's a division where I think, like you said, a lot of big men are used to just having a really long jab and a good right hand. And that takes them to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's read this. Opetaia is so good, but for some reason is not a star because the division has no attention. And he really never headlined a big card. It's sad. Jay is so good. Well, I think Jay is starting to get his props. Like, if you think about it, right? He has his star performance in 2022. You and me weren't even doing a podcast, I don't think, officially when he had his big breakout moment. We're going on 3 years of people knowing who Jai Opetaia is, maybe 4. I got to do the math. And I mean, this is kind of the trajectory of a star, right? He wasn't positioned to be a star. He's earning the star label. So for him, the achievement is he's achievement-based star, right? He's an
I also
achievement.
think he's an excitement-based star because it's not like, and maybe in Australia, obviously that was a bigger fight, but it's not like the guys he's fighting are big names, even within boxing circles. So I think that he's getting attention because he's exciting to watch.
And I also think if you break it down, right? Riyadh season, they got a big fight for him because they've taken a liking to him and they're putting him on cards. That's not charity. They're not like, you know what, this is a good guy. So I don't know if it's Better Beef, Bivol, David Benavidez, but down the road there's going to be a big fight for him because they've been showcasing him. Maybe it's the Zordo fight they were building to, but it feels like there's a mega fight in his future. And I think that him being associated with the Riyadh season cards and him being featured on so many of them has really elevated his profile in the sport too.
100%. And I think that fight's coming for him too if he doesn't get caught, and actually pays the consequences for it.
Well,
Because that's the other thing. He did get clipped in the 3rd round, I think it was, and his legs went out from under him. So it's like you're still walking a tightrope, even as explosive and exciting as he is. He's still walking a tightrope.
Let's see. So Mick Lloyd, hey guys, Jay is really coming to age, and Aussies love him as they did Zoo and Sam Goodman. I mean, I think, to be honest with you, he's probably the most organic Australian boxing star currently. I'd say it's him, Liam Paro, Tim Zoo. I'd say George Kambosos is probably the biggest name guy because he has the most distinguished win. But I'd say, wouldn't you say him and Zoo are probably the guys right now? And there's probably like the more hardcore fanatic fans are probably like, I'm really in on Jay, because there is a huge cool factor to Jai Opetaia. He's a
I also think Sky Nicholson will start kind of being in that conversation. There's a good batch of Australian fighters right now.
I think Sky is, but I think sexism is real in boxing, and there's always going to be people that are just going to be like, she's a girl. I don't like girl fights. I mean, to me, Sky is phenomenal, and she's one of the best female fighters out. But I get what you're saying, and I think she'll elevate to that point. But I think there's going to be some natural resistance because I'll always bring up, like, to me, Clarissa Shields is phenomenal, right? And you'll always get people saying, well, what about this? Or, well, if we play the what about this game, Dakota, what about every fighter, right? Because there's always, like, you could go, well, Terrence Crawford beat Errol Spence. Well, what about the car crash? Like, are we going to devalue what kind of win that was? Oh, and we got some more. So what's Parker's way to victory versus Daniel Dubois? A good stick and lateral movement and circling out when Dubois tries to ambush him early.
Yeah, I think just being a little bit more slippery the way he's been against both Wilder and Zhilei Zhang. I think if he tries to, clash heads and go head to head in terms of power and intensity, that's a tough out. But I think he may have some more layers in terms of his IQ. It's a hell of a fight, bro.
And then do you think Serrano was robbed versus Taylor? I don't remember what your thoughts were, but I didn't think so. I thought I scored the fight for Taylor, but I thought it was the definition of a close fight.
I had it 1 point for Amanda. And so when you got a 1 point fight, I can't call it a robbery. I did feel like she edged it, but I couldn't call it a robbery.
I felt Katie edged it, but I also felt like neither really took that fight at the end, and it was just going to come down what the judges saw.
Yeah.
And there's, like, we talk about this all the time. There's a difference between a close fight and a robbery. If it's a 1 point fight, that's just a close fight, And then Mick Lloyd, thank you, Mick, for watching the show today. We really appreciate. We hope you've earned you over to listen to more shows outside of this one. Although Jay isn't too well known, he will be soon. He became a champion the hard way, but I'm sure he'll go a long way. I think that that's the reason Australians and Aussies get behind Jay, is he has this no nonsense, like he's kind of intimidating, he's kind of crazy. I don't know if you watch press interviews, but he's very like, I'm not gonna talk. He's in my way for my, like, he's very like stoic, and I like the guy, but I'm gonna beat him. And he has these action knockouts. And I think there's a sense of he's earned his position, whereas some other fighters might have been promoted to the spot. And that's not a shot at Paro or Tim Tszyu. I just am saying from what I think because I think they earned their spot too. I think Tim is a fantastic fighter, and I think Paro is probably one of the most underrated fighters. But I think there's a sense of like a working class guy in Jai Opetaia where he was not supposed to be where he's at, and he earned it on his merit.
Yeah, I tell you what, if Sam Goodman beats Inoue, you got a new guy in Australia too. That's going to be the star.
Well, that's a great segue, Dakota. So we're going at 26 minutes in. Sam Goodman is no longer fighting Inoue. Did you hear about this?
No, dude.
So the fight's off again. Inoue's fighting a fighter that I'm not familiar with, and apparently is much less distinguished. So that fight is off.
What happened?
I didn't really even read the reports, but apparently, I mean, I shouldn't speculate, but I mean, it's like he had a cut.
We got a nice chat going, so maybe if somebody in the chat wants to let us
know in the chat, because we got a good chat. But the fight's off. Inoue's now fighting. I think the guy's name. Let me find the guy's name. I think it's Ji Yoon Kim. Is the name of the boxer.
Yeah.
And look, I'm an Inoue guy, right? So I like Inoue. Or let's see, Neo, Inoue, BoxRec. I like Inoue, right? And I think he's talented, but this is not a fight that, I'll put it like this, Dakota. I'm not waking up at 3 a.m. my time for this one. I woke up for many Inoue fights, but this is not going to be the one. I'll read to you the new opponent. It's Yi Jun Kim. He's 21-2-2. They're fighting January 24th. He's on a 2-fight win streak. He lost a majority decision 2 fights ago to Rob Diesel, a good veteran in America, a journeyman veteran. He has 2 draws and he lost. So, I mean, barring something weird, but I mean, like, once again, what do we always say? These are the fights that can get weird, is when you have an opponent like this. This should be in a way, you watch the fight and you get the result via your favorite social media platform for most people in the US.
Yeah, this one's for the locals.
Well, and this is for, like, if you're all in on Inoue, maybe the way we like Usyk. Like, I don't miss an Usyk fight.
But nobody. I'm also not getting up at 3 a.m. for Usyk. So I think this really is one that's for the locals. I'm sure that Kim has some sort of regional backing that would get him into this position. So, listen, and our guy Vinayak Singh is saying, yeah, Inoue, the fight was canceled because the cut was really bad on his eye. Listen, bro, that was a nasty cut, and it's hard for me to imagine that 4 weeks would be enough for that to really heal. I think the weird part, it feels like a no-brainer that you would just segue into a fight with Akhmedov, but I think he just wants to stay active.
Well, I mean, it's the thing for me, right, about the Akhmedov fight is he's obviously, to me, in that division, the most interesting opponent. And the fight either needs to happen or we need to get a more interesting fight. Because it's like we got Bam, who's lingering around. We got Junto Nakatani, who's phenomenal. And we got MJ. And I get it. Inoue had 4 years of car crashes. He had a bunch of hard fights. But I really want to see him in a fight of significant meaning pretty soon.
Yep.
Back to the chat. Do you think Tim Tszyu and Munguilla can make a comeback? Personally, sure, why not? They're both fantastic fighters who have shown elite level traits in their ways. I think they're both significant punchers and physical and tough guys. I think they can, but I think also stylistically they can run into a durability issue because is it possible they come back? I think certainly.
Sure. Without a doubt.
McLeod, what's the go with Sam Goodman's fight? I think we just
went
touched on
through that,
that.
yeah.
The fight. Okay. Why is Inoue avoiding MJ? I don't think he's avoiding him. I just think that it's like, it's kind of like Benavidez and Canelo, but not as crazy. I think that MJ losing to Marlon Tapales really hurt him because that would have been forced the fight. And then I think because he has some traits that Inoue has never fought, he's the most undesirable. So I wouldn't say it's unavoiding. It's like you have a guy that doesn't really draw much money, who's a significant challenge.
Yeah.
And there's other fighters who are more intriguing, who bring more money.
And that's not a last second replacement type of guy. So if Goodman's just pulling out now 13 days or 12 days before the actual fight, you know, that's not a guy you're getting on 2 weeks notice. You gotta have a full camp for a guy like that. And you can't say that he's avoiding MJ if he's fighting Sam Goodman, for me at least.
And Inoue has no real threat. Let's be real. You should rematch the guy who dropped him. I mean, to me, MJ is a threat. To me, Junto Nakatani is a threat. To me, when Bam Rodriguez moves up, he's a threat. So I think that also there's a unpopular opinion I have that Inoue could be getting worse. Like, he didn't have the greatest year this year, and he's getting into that age range where those lower weight fighters get diminished. And I think we got to see where his career is going, right? Because we don't know. And I think also there's a romanticism amongst fans and writers. When a guy is amazing at the lower weights, you glorify their achievement because they often don't get the praise on networks. And I think Inoue is kind of in this honeymoon period where he's achieved so much. People are doing that. Inoue is a brick wall. Do you guys think Alan Picasso can give Inoue problems? I personally don't, but it depends on where Inoue's at, right? Because I do feel like the TJ Dahoney fight showed that Inoue he's not the same guy because the physicality of TJ Dahoney really gave him issues. Tim will be back. Do you think Spence will make easy work of Fedora? To be honest with you, we got to see that fight get signed before I even put my brain into it, because
we're a year into talking about this fight. It's like, whatever, make it or don't.
I'm just not using my brain cells on a fight that's just been speculated for too long, just to be honest with you. Furthering on, did you watch the Callum Simpson highlight video I sent you against Steed Woodall?
That was exciting.
Well,
can I tell you my first thought, Lukie, and my perfectly candid first thought? I'm having a hard time keeping track of my Callums. So there was I thought I was watching. I thought I was watching Callum Walsh. And then I Googled that because he was on another 360 card. So I am having a hard time keeping track of my Callums. If there is a talented Callum out there that pulls up with a fire ass nickname, you will separate yourself from all the Callums, for me at least. So that's a ploy to all my Callums out there. But it was a really fun knockout. It was exciting. He's another interesting guy to add to the mix at super middleweight. I don't know enough about the opponent, but you know, he looks like an exciting fighter.
Yeah, I thought the stoppage was pretty bad. I thought it was an exciting fight. He was on the way to getting a stoppage, but I thought I felt gutted for Steed Woodall, who kind of battled himself back and for those that didn't see it, we should assume most American fans, which is most of our base, I would assume. Simpson gets a knockdown, and it's a very dramatic knockdown. And he's very celebrated, and he's a good action fighter. Wouldn't you just say Simpson's a good come forward? I'm not sure where the ceiling is, but he's an exciting come forward fighter. And then he lands a couple of punches in a round, and the referee just steps in while Woodall is literally in a boxing stance. I guess if we're trying to hypothesize why they stopped it, is he was taking a lot of punishment in prior rounds, and then he saw his head snap back and just was like, I guess I don't want you continuing. But it was strange because it didn't feel like a significant moment of damage had landed, yet the fight was halted. And I think that the sad thing is, for Simpson, it was an exciting performance that proved he's of a certain tier to main event. And yet that sequence of events probably overshadows the performance because the stoppage was so strange.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, bro, if you're a Callum, you got to get a fire nickname.
What are we going to call him? How do we separate Callum Simpson from the other Callums?
I don't know, bro. He's got to come up with something that's special and unique for him. But I'm somewhat joking, but I'm also somewhat serious. Like, there are probably 13 Callums that have been relevant in boxing in the last 15 years. And sometimes I start losing track of which one is which. And it's not because they're not talented, but there is some truth to that for me.
And they all kind of seem to have the same kind of last name in a weird way. Like Callum
Similar weight.
Simpson and Callum Smith. It's like that's a little too close. Like you're gonna start to get them mixed, you know?
Yeah, you got Callum Johnson, you got Callum. There's too many, and it's all good. I know that's like the Michael for America, but I'm just putting that out as a ploy to all the talented Callums. Get yourself a cool ass nickname.
Okay, what did you think of Caroline Dubois? It's the first time I think you've ever seen her fight. Isn't she fun?
She's really fun. Great combinations. I can't remember, too many times seeing a female fighter that really has that free swinging punch style. A lot of combinations. She's definitely a handful. It's a bummer. I think just because of where they fought, right? That was essentially the equivalent of a no contest. It wasn't like they actually scored the fight. So
it was 3 rounds. They said the cut was accidental. Also, shout out to Justis-Camara coming out in a Cleopatra like ring walk. Thought that was a bold move,
Yeah.
That's like, it's like, let's do vanity and all this, and then we get into a fight. Like, I thought that was kind of a thing, but I don't know if you remember, Camara gave Callie Reyes a hard fight. She's a very, very tough fighter. And Caroline Dubois basically separated and made it look like it wasn't even a contest, in my opinion.
Yeah, she mugged her a little bit.
So I've been saying that I think Caroline Dubois is probably the next great women's boxer. I think it's her, Lauren Price. I think there's a couple others coming up, but those are like the two kind of Hall of Fame tier fighters that I see, like Lauren Price and her. I'd be very shocked if they're not Hall of Fame trajectory fighters. So kind of disappointing, right? The result, a little disappointing, but I thought it was a great start to the year for her. And for Justis-Camara, I'm sure it's super disappointing because it's a draw, although that's probably better than a stoppage or a loss, but she leaves with a cut and she has a physical style. And that type of cut, I feel like if she keeps fighting, is going to resurface in future fights.
100%.
Okay, that speaks to that. Let's go through some of the comments, the questions. Don't worry about Fedora. What did you guys think of the Ring Magazine Awards? I didn't watch it. I like Sergio Mora a lot, so I think he was involved with it, so I'll go back and see him. But to be honest, like, I don't know. I just wasn't really drawn to it. I was seeing if like fighters said stuff embarrassing that maybe I should be aware of. But I don't, how do I say this, Dakota? Not a fan of like boxing events where everyone has to wear suits. I think that kind of like dumbs down, or to kind of like, we're getting away from what makes boxing, which is like a bunch of guys in hoodies going to a gym.
Bro.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that like, I would probably have watched it if it's a bunch of guys wearing shirts that say their name on it that look like Roots of Fight merch. And like you got, I don't know. It just felt too grandiose for me. I saw a list of the winners and they all seemed like good choices. But I mean, if you get competent boxing guys, I think that you typically get the right people. Right? Like there's not that many people you can check. Like I think the only thing that surprised me was they gave Ray Ford and Klomatov fight of the year over Usyk Fury, which I think to me was a little shocking. But other than that, it felt like all the right guys won. Usyk won fighter of the year. That's like a no-brainer. I don't know. He was lucky. Jake Paul ruined boxing. What's going on with Gervonta's fight? Is it canceled or not? We have no clue.
Who the fuck knows?
It's, I mean, I think I was saying this to my girlfriend too. There's a level of interaction with probably starting with people your age, Dakota, but maybe it's a little earlier than you. Maybe it's a little before you, where they've always had a cell phone that had the internet.
Yep.
And I feel like with Gervonta, there's a level of like, he just knows how to communicate with a phone to the world in a way where if he feels something, he does stuff and he can push buttons. And it's a uniquely modern thing that's just going to get crazier and crazier as we go along. And he's like the first kid that's kind of doing it. and I just don't know how to read it. And I think part of it's because I'm trying to get off social media and I just don't find it fascinating. But I think he kind of gets excited being like, oh, my fight's off. And then people go, oh, the fight's off. What's going on?
Well,
And he's
he
like,
can also do that and stay relevant without having to stay active.
and you know what we're doing right now? We're just saying stuff because no one knows. And it's not that fascinating. And we're a boxing show. We're not a social media show. Does Teofimo have a legitimate reason for not to fight, or is he just a clown? I don't know. Tio's been doing some weird interviews lately. I don't want to get into it, but I just hope he's doing well. He's someone that was good to me early in my career, and he's just doing interviews where I think that, yeah, it's just been strange. So I'm not a big fan of, getting Tio on a podcast and just asking him kind of leading questions and letting him kind of. So I think that he's a guy that's trying to be as sincere as possible, but it seems like he's gone through a rough couple of years. And personally, I'd like to leave Tio alone on that because it just seems like there's a lot of things going on and it's easy just to say, whatever and whatever. Jake Paul getting boys out and going to the boxing gym. Grandiose events is what boxing needs. Men and hoodies over grandiose, Mick Lloyd. And then James Boyd getting put in timeout. Shout out to James Boyd. So there we go. There's only one card that we got this week, and it is a 360 promotions card. We got pretty decent action on it. Omar Trinidad in the main event taking on Mike Plania. He's number 2 in the IBF at featherweight. The promotion seems to want to push him towards the title. Old school guy. Their matchmaker, Charles Bossecker, told me for a story that came out today on Boxing Scene that they really view him as like that old school limited amateur guy. He had like 50, 60 amateur fights, came back in 2020. He's fought 17 times in 4.5 years, basically, and really taken some significant challenges for regional stuff to earn his spot. For you, how familiar are you with Omar Trinidad?
I don't know Trinidad at all. I do remember Mike Plania beating, I think it was Josh Greer a few years back. And I remember being relatively impressed with Plania at the time. I know he's taken some tough losses since then, but at one time, I think that there was some promise there.
Well, I think also like with Plania, he's that veteran that doesn't get respect in the sport, where he doesn't have the pedigree where a promoter is probably going to sign him. So he had to fight like a guy like Raiz Aleem, and I think he had a majority decision or a unanimous decision loss, but he gave our guy Raiz a tough fight. And there's a level of significance to that, right? When these guys fight and all that stuff. So Plania, to me, he's coming off a 12-round fight, which is, it's obviously like, hey, can you go 12 for a title fight? Like it, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, kind of aspirationally building to that. Plania is a veteran who maybe never fought for a title off the top of my head, but he's been in the ring with guys of a certain caliber that I don't think Trinidad has fully been in with. I think that he fought Victor, the Ukrainian guy, and stopped him, who's probably very similar, but Plania, I think, is a wily veteran who, I always talk about this, right? He's going to take you into those deep rounds. So he's going to take you into, maybe he'll lose maybe like the first 7 rounds, but then in the 8th round, he's going to look for a big right hand. And if he catches you, he's going to try to stop you. And I think that's the test of this fight, is that this is a veteran who might not try to win every minute of every round, but he's going to wait for opportunities and try to drown Trinidad. And for me, I think the big thing I'm looking at is Trinidad's a good puncher. He's showing a lot of promise. He works extremely hard. You can tell by his body that he works extremely hard too. But there's also a level of, he's got to get that experience with these veterans.
Right.
Okay, so that seemed like that was pretty boring to you.
I mean, I'm definitely gonna watch it.
Yeah, you're gonna watch it. Co-feature, I think, is someone you should be aware of. Let me get the WBO champion's name, because that would just be a travesty if I said the name wrong. I'm going to say a breakout star this year. I think it's, let me read it to you, Mizuki Hiruta. And Mizuki Hiruta is the junior bantamweight WBO female champion, women's champion, trained by Manny Robles. She has purple hair.
I've seen this
She
girl.
dresses like an anime character, and she's got tremendous power puncher. She screams of being like the first female fighter that Tom Loeffler promotes that has traits like Golovkin or Chocolatito, where there's like an X Factor superstar trait. She's fighting a girl who's a veteran, not a distinguished record. If I look at it, Maribel Ramirez record is 15-10-4. I would assume this is a voluntary defense, but I think this is going to be a big, like a big announcement to her in America, and I think they're going to try to bring her back fairly quickly in the LA market in a bigger fight. And I think that by the end of the year, hot take, she's going to be the biggest name in this division. There's going to be a calling for her and Fundora to fight. And I think that she's going to be someone that we look back in January and kind of has like a Iglesias did this year in Canada, came out of nowhere and emerged. I think she's going to have kind of with 360, have like a really big uptick this year.
Yeah, I've seen her. She is very exciting. I think especially in light of Sinise Estrada retiring, I think there's sort of a void for a star in the lower weights for females right now. And it's possible she could be that fighter.
Okay, and then we have Ali Akhmedov. He's going to be on this undercard. He's taking on Malcolm. I think it's Malcolm Jones. Not really an exciting fight. Ali had a terrible last performance. He got dropped in it, I believe, and he just looked bad. He left his previous coach, Jonathan Banks. Now he's training with Ricky Funes. I don't know. To me, it's like Ali signed or was being promoted at an early age, like about 22, 23. He was behind Golovkin. Now he's getting close to 30, and the trajectory hasn't really changed. He had that Carlos Gongora loss, but he's never really ascended to like the heights that I think we initially expected. So, I mean, I'm expecting him to have a good performance here, but I really need to see him turn a corner probably this year, because it's getting to be the time where it's you are who we thought you are.
Yeah, it's start getting into like a failure to launch kind of situation.
Yeah, and I think that last fight was I'm sure there were circumstances outside of it, but he was fighting a tough guy who the record didn't match up to the skill set, right? So that always hurts you. But I mean, he really underperformed, if we're being honest. That was not a stellar performance, and it wasn't the fight he needed.
He's been also, at least to my knowledge, not been very active. I can't remember seeing him since the Rosado fight, and I remember that being a decent performance, but he hasn't really built off of it at all.
Half-baked research. Since the Rosado fight, he's fought 3 times. 1 time in Kazakhstan, 1 time, I believe, on an undercard for our guy Dimitri Salita in May, and then he fought on the Callum Smith undercard in Dublin. So I think another thing is like he's just kind of all over the place. So there's like no consistencies. He's fought 3 times, but one's internationally at home. There's not really like, so he's going to be on the card. I would expect him to look pretty good. He's with a new coach. He's bouncing back. And then the fight that I really like. Are you ready for there's two fights I think you should be aware of. One 50-50 fight. Our girl that was on the show, Brooke Sibrian, taking on Gloria Munguilla. I think that it's like a 5-1 fighter versus a 6-1 fighter. 108-pound women. I know a bunch of people go, oh, that's terrible. I don't watch it. This is like a 50-50 fight. This is a comparable skill set fight. Gloria Munguilla trains with, I believe, Omar Trinidad's team. So there's a level of like, okay, if she maybe gets the win, she might be fighting on Trinidad's cards. But this is a tough matchup because Brook also has a good skill set and presents a lot of problems for a lot of fighters. So I think that if you're a hardcore fan and you want to see a really good fight, this is the fight of the week. This is the one I would say go out of your way to watch.
Hell yeah, Brook is very exciting. Obviously, a very multi-talented person as well.
There's that. And then my final one to watch on 360, right hook Roxy. She kind of reminds me
Yep.
of a Ryan Garcia in women's boxing. I think she's already got 100,000 followers on social media. She punches the heavy bag. It sounds different than most women. There's a ferocity to her punches. I'm really surprised that she didn't get signed sooner. She signed with 360, but to me, she feels like a superstar type fighter. I've seen this with her since the amateurs. There's been a lot of buzz around her career. She's fighting, I think, Lindsay Ellis, 2-1, 2 knockouts. I'm expecting her to have probably her best performance as a pro. She's had 2 solid performances, maybe 3. I forget the record, but that's what I'm looking for. Is I think that by the end, I think that 360 Promotions have 2 women superstars in their roster right now, and it's Right Hook Roxy, and I think it's Lupe Medina, who has a lot of similarities to Sinise Estrada, a young Sinise Estrada. And I think what's interesting is those 2 could be headlining cards in LA maybe 2 years from now.
Very exciting card.
Breakdown, as you know, Dakota was underqualified. To break it down, let's go through a few news and notes. Is there any news happenings in boxing that you saw that you care about?
I have been so goddamn busy, Lukie. I'm along for the ride today.
Let me just do a quick check if we missed anything for people. Ring Magazine Awards, Goodman's out. Sabrina Matisse is ordered to fight Gabriel Gales Valenzuela in an IBF eliminator. So that's for the number 1 contender. So that happened this week. Jack Catterall versus Arnold Barbosa now will be for the interim junior welterweight title, because I take it because TO is kind of not active. So I think that because that division's kind of gone stagnant since the
How
summer.
a lot of our young champions are, right, Lukie? I mean, that's what we've been talking about, bro. Like, our guys just don't fucking fight. And it's like, I can't defend guys that I see every 16 months anymore.
Muratalla will take on Zaire Abdullah, I believe, for the IBF lightweight title.
Is it Zor Abdullayev?
Zor.
That guy's good, bro.
And Raymond Muratalla will fight for an IBF interim title, while
That's a tough fight, bro.
Vasil Lomachenko will get a medical exemption to see if he's going to basically keep boxing, because Loma holds the IBF belt, but apparently so that's something that happened.
That's a hell of a fight, bro.
Yeah, that got you excited. And they're saying, some people are reporting that Munguilla versus Bruno Saras is set. Some are saying it's not. There's a mandatory rematch and all that stuff. And then we got to answer these questions. Finally, Mick Lloyd killing it in the comments. Who's next for Tim Tszyu homegrown fights? For me personally, I like a Michael Zarafa fight. It's an Australian fight. I think.
What do you do it at middleweight?
Wherever weight, wherever you want to do it. But I think the Zarafa fight is just a natural one. And then from there, I would try to get Erickson Lubin. How about the winner of Eric?
For me, the way he lost that last one, I do think it's a homegrown fight time. Get some wins and get some confidence. I also think he should take some time, like some more time off, because the last 2 fights, between the cut and the level of beatdown he took, I do think you got to kind of go back to basics a little bit, just for me personally.
But I think that, like, Mick Lloyd hits it on the head. Yeah, I hate peeps who don't fight. That's why we love Timmy. There is a level of Tim doesn't want to take bad fights. And
Love
I think but I think that that's kind of what got him in trouble this year, was like a lot of guys are like, okay, position me, build me up. And he just kind of was like, okay, I was going to fight Thurman, put me in with a 6'6" guy on 2 weeks notice. Okay. I'm coming back off of a bad cut. Virgil Ortiz fight is off. Put me with an unknown title holder in a real fight that everyone assumes I'm going to win. Like there's a level of badass to Tim Tszyu that honestly we don't see in a lot of fighters today. So I think the other thing is he's a guy that's not gonna probably take a bullcrap fight.
And he's also a guy, I think at this point, with those kinds of fights, if he's able to bring himself back up to the top of the sport, that's really the road less traveled, bro. Not a lot of guys can come back from a cut of that magnitude and losses like that.
So he brought up Virgil Ortiz, Mick Lloyd did. I really don't like the Virgil fight because that Virgil's just too strong, I think, and we've seen how that fight goes. But I want to bring up this about the Virgil fight. You know, I'm a big Virgil guy. I'm a bigger Virgil guy than probably you are. I really like Virgil. That Madrimov fight is a very tough fight. So let's not look past it because we're looking at a guy who's got good movement, physically tough. Hey, Dakota, he turned pro in a 10-round fight. Madrimov. Right. People are looking at him like he's Johnny Tune-Up fight. Like Israel Madrimov is coming off a fight with Crawford where realistically he could mentally, I'm not saying he mentally couldn't, mentally fully believes this, but he could tell himself that he beat Crawford. Like he was competitive enough where he could be like, ah, man, they didn't score it right. So he's got the anxiety of losing a fight off his back. He's going to fight free. And he's an equation that we haven't fully seen yet with Virgil. And I would argue Mean Machine gave Virgil a very difficult fight. And Mean Machine doesn't do what Madrimov does and isn't as big as Madrimov. With Ortiz, I love him. I think he's a fantastic fighter. We're not talking about Ortiz beyond the Madrimov fight because that is a real fight. And I am tired of people disrespecting Israel Madrimov just because they don't know him. Just because it's like with Usyk, it's with a lot of these guys, even Jai Opetaia. Just because you didn't watch his career doesn't mean you should overlook him and just say the fighters you know. So that's what I wanted to say.
It's a great point, buddy.
Okay, so we're about to get off the podcast. But before we get off, I want to throw it to the chat. Any final questions for the chat? If you want, we're gonna kind of let Dakota say his piece where you can follow him. Throw us some questions, and if you have questions, we will answer them in the final few minutes. Dakota, how can people support you and your boxing coverage?
You can always follow me at the Slip and Weave Podcast on YouTube and Instagram. You can catch me on the Lukie Boxing Show every Sunday or whenever we can do it. You can always catch me at ITR Boxing. And appreciate everybody in the chat, man. You guys are the third host.
Yeah, it was a great show today. Next week, we will be back either Saturday or Sunday because there's only one card. I guess there's one other thing I could bring up. Wasn't like a big card, but Kingsley eBay got his 10th win, second back-to-back first-round knockout, knocking out Scott Alexander, former Thompson boxing fighter. Deep cut, but I mean, it was deep cut weekend. Probably going to be in the mix with like a guy like Richard Torres. Like, you know, it's like he's that 286 guy. And then our guy, Austin Brooks, I'm not sure if we had him on the show together, but Austin Brooks, 130-pounder, rebounded from his first career draw, got a win. Pretty decent card. I probably should have sent it to you when it was on live. Toro Promotions does YouTube streams live of their fights, but then they put them behind a members-only paywall after the event, so you have to watch them live. But it was a good 5-6 fight card that was like 2.5 hours start to finish, which I love. I love like a bing, like 1, 2, 3. So, yeah, so we'll be back next week. We're not sure what day we'll be back, but we're going to talk 360 promotions. And then get this, we got some big fights to talk, buddy. We got Inoue. It's not the greatest Inoue fight, but it's an Inoue fight. We got Diego Pacheco, Steven Nelson. We got a fight that I'm excited about, Eric Priest versus Tyler Howard, which I think is a sneaky tough fight. We got some fights, man. And then after that, that's like a little appetizer for our meal. We're getting into Benavidez Morel. And then we start cooking, buddy, because then we got the February 22nd card at the end of that month. So we're going to start having some pretty big things, but it's been slow. But I think that Diego Pacheco, Steve Nelson fight, I think that's a real fight.
That's definitely a real fight. I like that fight a lot.
And I'm going to throw one out to you too for our guy Salida. I think the Clarissa Shields fight on a Sunday is a pretty good fight too. I think people are overlooking Clarissa's fighting at heavyweight against a real heavyweight. Yes, she's older, but I think that's an interesting fight. And I think that a lot of times with these smaller promoters, people overlook the shows like the 360s, like the Salitas. Not that they're small, but like because they're not in your face and all over the top, they don't show them the same respect. But I think that Clarissa Shields card is going to be a good top to bottom card with some good fights. And I think that that weekend is going to be like boxing weekend because you get yourself a Benavidez Morel pay-per-view. And then that Sunday, you get a Clarissa Shields fight the week before the Super Bowl. So that's boxing bowl. And you get a double header. You know, what are we going to do that week? Are we going to do a pregame show for the Clarissa fight? That kind of screws up our routine.
That might be excessive.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying like, do we do the show and then the next week we recap Clarissa, or do we have to do it on a Monday? Like, what do we do for that?
We'll figure it out. I don't think people need to.
Yeah, people don't need to know that. No, I'm just thinking, but okay, guys, we appreciate you a ton. This was a great start to the year. Dakota, awesome, and we will talk to you guys later.